Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to a special episode of Your Legislators. I'm your host, Jonny Coker. Now, normally on the show, we focus on New Mexico's legislative session, but today we're going to be focusing on the federal government with none other than U.S. Congressman Gabe Vasquez. Congressman, thanks so much for being on the program today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks, Jonny.
Of course. So I just wanted to start off by asking, you've been traveling around the area this week, and you've been quite vocal about the tariffs being proposed by the Trump administration and how that's going to affect farmers and industry in the area. Can you just give me an overview of what you're hearing from folks on the ground, from your constituents, about how these tariffs might affect them?
Absolutely. Well, we live in a very critical part of the country in which we have the opportunity to have international trade, agriculture, now light manufacturing, assembly, logistics, things that are making our economy grow here in southern New Mexico. A lot of those inputs, especially from imports and exports, are reliant on a good diplomatic relationship with our southern neighbor in Mexico. Tariffs present a huge problem. Now, when we look at the cost of goods for the average American, whether they're buying a refrigerator, a dishwasher, a new car, or let's say the price of beef that's produced right here in southern New Mexico, they all depend on inputs from the Mexican side of the border. And so when we talk about a 25% tariff on all goods being imported from Mexico, it has an impact on the price of goods, not just for New Mexicans, but for Americans all across the country. And so what we're hearing from ranchers, what we're hearing from farmers, what we're hearing from folks that are investing in the places like the Santa Teresa Border Industrial Center, is that tariffs are going to devastate the economy. They're going to devastate their businesses. Investors may pull out. They're going to have to charge more for the food products that we produce here, onion and chili, and of course livestock. And so that's very troubling to hear that we're taking a hammer to an approach that where we should be using perhaps a scalpel to look at how we can remain competitive in the global economy. And so tariffs are going to be incredibly damaging for southern New Mexico and our economy on all fronts.
Do you think that, these tariffs could just be some saber rattling in terms of the current Trump administration of wanting to get a better deal on the next renegotiated USMCA? Or do you think, what's your take on that? Do you think, and if it is just saber rattling, is that a good idea in your opinion?
Well, look, what this administration doesn't realize is that anytime that you change the trajectory of a business, whether that's increasing tariffs by 25%, limiting federal funds, whether they be contracts or grants, which we're seeing in the agricultural sector today, support for SBA in the terms of small business development, those businesses can't flourish. And here in New Mexico, we have a lot of mom and pop businesses, small farms, folks that are trying to make it into this economy, that are trying to build businesses. So any level of uncertainty that you bring into the business environment is going to have a significant impact. And so while the saber rattling may be happening in Washington, D.C., the tangible impacts in New Mexico are that folks are going to start pulling out of investments. They may not choose to relocate here, and that affects everybody because on the line are hundreds of jobs, are millions of export dollars that we have right here in Doña Ana County. So it could be saber rattling in Washington, but here in New Mexico has very real consequences.
And, during the last Trump administration, there were, tariffs put on China, and that had a huge effect on farmers across the United States, and that led to subsidies being given to many of these farms in order for them to survive. What is that going to do to New Mexico farmers and ranchers? How do you expect to minimize the harm if these tariffs do go into place?
Well, we're hearing loud and clear from farmers and ranchers in New Mexico that tariffs are not an option for them to continue to stay in business. Now, this is everyone from our onion growers to our chili growers to our livestock operations. We import fertilizer, alfalfa, other inputs that go into New Mexico's agricultural industry. And look, big farms like the soybean industry, the corn industry, they have the luxury of being in the president's ear and having the favor of the administration. And what we saw last time was farm credit being used in a way that's never been used before, which is to compensate soybean farmers for the tariffs that the president placed on China. If we see that here for example, the onion industry or chili or livestock, we'd be lucky. I don't think we can expect to see any of that because our folks here are small family farms. I was just at a farm today down in Anthony where we talked about the impact of these tariffs, who hire both seasonal and permanent workers, hundreds of folks that are employed in producing red chili products that are designed right here at New Mexico State University at the Chili Pepper Institute and then sold to world markets. And the message that I got loud and clear was that tariffs would basically impact their business in such a negative way that they'd have to start downscaling and plan for that downscaling, if not completely go out of business.
You sit on the House Agriculture Committee, and you've been a vocal advocate of certain aspects of the 2025 Farm Bill. And food insecurity is a huge part of, is a huge issue in New Mexico, especially with all the cuts and potential tariffs that might affect farming in New Mexico. How are you going to ensure that New Mexicans are able to retain their benefits and that those food insecure households don't fall further behind?
Well, look, New Mexico farmers have enough problems already. We have water scarcity issues. We have labor issues, especially here in the Hatch Valley, the Rincon Valley, and the Mesilla Valley. And we have a lot of small producers that are contributing currently to things like Farmers Market with Double Up Food Bucks program that has helped local families access organic and healthy food. And not just that, but producers who stay in business partly because of the food they produce for folks that are on food assistance programs like SNAP or TFAP. So for New Mexico, it's a double-edged sword. Not only are we reducing the amount of eligibility for families that deserve to have healthy meals every single morning, every day for lunch and the afternoon, who are working families, but we're also hurting the farmers who are producing that food in the first place for that market. And so we expect to see next week that Republicans are going to look at a budget with significant cuts to SNAP. And they are going to try to sell it to the American people as significant cost savings in fraud and waste and abuse. And look, there's nothing more fundamental in government than being able to provide the most basic thing that human beings need in this country, and that is food. And so any cuts to SNAP, now we can reform SNAP in many different ways, but any cuts to SNAP in the way that Republicans so far are proposing are going to be devastating for those young kids who wake up every morning and wonder where their breakfast is going to come from. If those families no longer qualify for those benefits, it is going to be devastating to New Mexicans, because when you don't have a child that is well fed, they cannot learn in our schools. They cannot be successful. We know that, and we do suffer from great food insecurity here.
And you mentioned SNAP reforms. Is there anything in particular that you have in mind when it comes to those types of reforms? Maybe even a place where you can have some bipartisanship with Republicans in Congress in making sure that folks are still able to stay above the line, stay away from that food insecurity line.
Absolutely. Look, I agree wholeheartedly that we need to find fraud where it exists in the federal government, and that includes applicants to programs that include work assistance or food assistance, right? That's one thing. We can do that. But to take this hatchet approach to eliminating thousands of families in New Mexico from food assistance programs is not the approach that we want to take, because it is the most basic necessity for living that we have here. So again, I believe that if we do this, if we take this path, it is going to hurt our communities, it's going to hurt our families. And we know that a family in poverty, a family that is not well fed, is not going to have a good outcome.
And you mentioned those hatchet cuts being, happening in the federal government right now. What's your take on the Department of Government Efficiency? And, New Mexicans per capita rely heavily on federal subsidies, money from the federal government. So, what's your take on the massive cutting of federal programs, and what are you hearing from constituents about how that's going to affect them?
Well, federal programs and federal employees in our district have such a wide footprint in so many different industries and also our military, national security, service to veterans, service to seniors, food assistance programs, things like Meals on Wheels, after school, child care programs. So these cuts and these firings and these layoffs are going to fundamentally hurt every single family in New Mexico one way or another. We've heard, in fact, we had 700 responses in the last couple of days of folks from our district that submitted their testimonials of how these cuts are going to impact themselves and their families. And so what we're seeing is that across the board, and look, the election is over. No matter who folks voted for, that's not up to me. I don't care about that. What I care about is making sure that people still have a livelihood, an opportunity to have a good job, an opportunity to have a good quality of life. And as we see more of these cuts come down the line, not only are we losing federal jobs, but all the things that are dependent on those federal jobs are also going to lose. And I'll use National Park Service as an example. Carlsbad just cut 20% of their entire workforce at Carlsbad Caverns National Park Service. They're no longer able to offer after-school programs to the kids in Carlsbad. They told me that straight out. They are looking at reducing their actual hours of operation. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. From 7 days to potentially 5 days. They have no custodian anymore, which means who's taking out the trash? And you know how beautiful this place is to our district, and they can no longer operate at the same level that they used to before. So these are basic things. What this administration is doing is not cutting the fat. They are taking a sledgehammer approach that's going to impact our economy, that's going to impact our families, if we don't find a way to stop it soon.
And Congressman, it seems like, especially within the House, Republicans are very much silent on all of these cuts that are happening. How does the Democratic Party rally together and, make meaningful change, make sure that these cuts don't go on to hurt, our national parks and our working families? What are you hearing from other leadership in the House or other House Republicans even about, what's next? Like, how can we reduce the hurt that's happening to our communities right now?
Well, look, I am of the spirit of building bridges, especially because I come from a binational family, and I know how important our ties are with our southern neighbor. And it's the same approach that I take in Congress, is that I build bridges with Republicans when I'm in Congress. I pride myself in being able to work with them on common sense solutions that can bring forth good improvements to the quality of life of all Americans. But I focus in particular here in southern New Mexico. So as we look at some of these cuts that are coming down the pike, we have to look at how they're going to affect Republican districts. And so looking at cutting research facilities, for example, in a state like Alabama, right? Looking at the loss of capability in a state like Louisiana to do research on fossil fuel exploration. It hurts those economies, it hurts that industry, and those districts are mostly impacted because of the Republican lawmakers that choose to support certain policies that the administration puts forward. And so I want to make sure that they understand what those cuts mean to their district, just the same way that I know what those cuts mean to my district. And for folks that are worried about this, I can confidently say that Democrats are on your side. We are here to help. We are here to support this fight. What Republicans on the House side need to do is understand the implications to national security, to food security, to research for things like pediatric cancer, any number, diabetes, any number of things. These positions that are getting cut are not waste, fraud, and abuse. They are critical positions that help move our country forward, that improve the health of our people. And right here at New Mexico State University, that produce world-class research in things like rangeland management, right? I just heard today about several BLM employees that got fired who were tasked with rangeland science experiments that impact the Jornada experimental range here today. So all those things impact our country in a way that I don't think this administration fully grasps.
What types of conversations are you having with other House Republicans, whether it's in private or publicly, about their feelings on these government cuts? Is there a lack of speaking out from them? Do you think Republicans might be afraid of retaliation from the Trump administration? What's your take on that?
Well, look, I serve on two committees, the Agriculture Committee and the Armed Services Committee. So that's my opportunity to bring home results to my district. One in the form of the Farm Bill, which gets authorized every 5 years. Two in the National Defense Authorization Act, which gets enacted every year. that's the place where I can make a difference for this district outside of a larger scale. And so when I talk to my colleagues in the Agriculture Committee, for example, as a hunter and angler myself, I talk about the conservation programs that are threatened to be cut, reduced in the Farm Bill, CRP, EQIP, CSP, critical programs that are oversubscribed. We've got folks on waiting lists waiting to subscribe for these federal programs. I say, don't you like to have healthy grasslands? Don't you like to have healthy forests? Don't you like to have wildfire management prevention? Those are all good things for your district and for your community, aren't they? What the president is doing right now is reducing our capability to act on all those priorities that folks have in your district. And so I'm trying to find common ground with Republicans in any area that I can. You know, I created the bipartisan Southwest Caucus with my neighbor to the west, Mr. Juan Cisco Manny, who borders our district in Arizona. And we agreed on a bunch of different things: border security, public lands, and the economy. So we worked together, Republican and Democrat, to try to find solutions to those things. And it's been a fruitful conversation because I know I can call Juan and have honest conversations about him, understand where his party is at, and then we can try to figure out how do we both get folks on the Democratic side and on the Republican side to agree to some concessions on some of the most contentious issues that are before us here in this country.
And Congressman, something you mentioned was, forestry management. Of course, Ruidoso this last summer went through some devastating wildfires. You saw people on the ground, you were there. And now the federal government, the U.S. Forest Service is losing folks due to these government cuts, folks that manage the forests that help prevent these types of forest fires from happening. What takeaway should New Mexicans have when they see that happening? I mean, can New Mexicans living in forests, living in these vulnerable areas that could go up in flames really at any second, especially with the environmental factors that we're seeing this year, can they rely on the federal government to tend the lands, or do we need to start looking at other avenues to protect ourselves, essentially?
Under these conditions, absolutely not. Look, the cuts that we're seeing at the U.S. Forest Service, the cuts that we're seeing to FEMA that we saw just today and yesterday for emergency response for natural disasters are absolutely devastating to communities like Ruidoso or Silver City. I represent 5 national forests in my district, and the thought of not being fully prepared, both with thinning projects, prescribed burns, vegetation management, you name it, any number of things that these Forest Service employees are tasked with doing, and they do have the support of cooperating agencies like local counties, tribes like the Mescalero tribe up in the Lincoln, that help them carry on this work. If we reduce their ability to do that work, when a wildfire does break out, we will not be prepared for the devastation that is coming to us. We already are lacking resources within our own local emergency management centers, whether that be in Otero County, Lincoln County, and places like Grant County. We're already not prepared. So when you cut the federal workforce that is designed to help us be prepared, we're only putting ourselves in more danger. It's a dangerous decision that this administration has made to cut those jobs. And for those folks that choose to live in those interfaces between forest or public land and an urban interface like Ruidoso or Silver City, their insurance rates are going to continue to go up. I mean, imagine having less wildfire risk mitigation. What the insurance companies are going to do, they're going to hike up the rates for every single homeowner in those places because there's not enough preparedness. So it's a lose-lose for New Mexico and what is happening with our current federal workforce, especially in our forests.
So what should we do moving forward in that case to prepare for what's coming for us this summer is my next question, yeah.
That's a great question. Look, I think right now the state obviously has a great role to play with additional support and funding to help mitigate some of the impacts of forest fires, but I also don't have jurisdiction over federal land. I would implore any New Mexico citizen, especially to contact Republican leadership in the House and in the Senate and urge them to continue to have the right type of support at our regional forest service and our district office level to have the employees that they need to be able to combat and mitigate some of these impacts of wildfire. Because from our delegation in New Mexico, we're all working extremely hard to keep these jobs, but ultimately there's not a whole bunch we can do with the administration and the purview that they have currently to eliminate some of these positions that they deem either non-essential or temporary. that could be further from the case. You have 20-year veterans of National Park Service and Forest Service who have just been fired in the last month. I've spoken to them, and they're saying that their skills and qualifications don't meet the needs of the agency at the time. I mean, give me a break. You're telling that to somebody that chooses to live in Grants and does work for the National Park Service at El Morro or El Mal País or someplace like that. These are hard jobs to recruit for. Oftentimes they take a year to 2 years to get filled. And now we eliminate those positions, it's going to put us in a lot of danger.
Congressman, we don't have a ton of time left, but I did want to ask about the Trump administration's current executive orders targeting migrants and immigration. What's your take on everything, especially specifically, I wanted to ask about the closure of the CPB One app and the stopping of refugees coming into the country. What's your take on everything that's happening at the border, especially obviously being in a border district?
Well, look, this is a conversation we should continue to have because our immigration system has been broken for so long, and it seems like with every administration we face different challenges. That challenge primarily relies on Congress to do its job. And I'll say it, both Democrats and Republicans haven't done their job to reform our immigration system in a way that fits our workforce needs, that treats people with dignity and with humanity, and that reforms our broken asylum system either. And so at this point, we are seeing actions that are very performative from the administration that are infringing on the civil rights of everyday American citizens. We've heard reports from Navajo Nation, from Mescalero, about folks being profiled. And that's one of the things I fear, right, is that the profiling of folks in places like ours, in border communities, who is deemed to be a suspect, right? What makes you look undocumented? What makes somebody suspicious that they would call ICE or another enforcement agency on you? It creates division in our communities in a place where we've never had that division. You know, New Mexico's border communities are built on this trust of binational commerce of families that cross every day. And if you take it back even further, the Bracero program, agricultural workers, and even back to the Gadsden Purchase, right? Many folks here will tell you the border crossed us because this was the last remaining territory that belonged to Mexico before it became the United States. And so I hate to see that fear in my community. I think the administration's approach to immigration enforcement is completely wrong-headed, and it's more of a reality TV show than it is good policy. And I think Americans deserve better. I think New Mexicans deserve better. And I'm going to continue to fight to have actual immigration reform in Congress. And I've spoken in our community to some shelters in the area who are worried about losing federal funding. And what they've said to me specifically is that if they disappear, then there's no longer going to be infrastructure in place for when that next wave of migration does come, whether it's because of a hurricane or other humanitarian disaster. There is going to be another wave of migration. But they may not be there when that happens due to the current cuts happening at the federal government level. What is your message to those folks? Look, it's predictability. What we need is predictability in our immigration system. And that means reforming the asylum process. That means reforming who is able to apply for legal residency or citizenship status in this country. Everybody from farm workers to nurses to folks working in education and infrastructure. I introduced several bipartisan bills to achieve this purpose. Is like, let's look at where our actual workforce needs are in this state and in this country and match them with an immigration program that makes sense so that folks that are economic migrants actually have an opportunity to work in this country, apply for those jobs, and do it in a competitive way, right? Whatever their skills may be. The elimination of the CBP One app I thought was a misstep because it actually deterred a lot of asylum seekers from reaching our borders. And the reason I say that is because that journey, especially across Mexico, when you're involved with cartels and coyotes and polleros, is so dangerous for those folks that the more that we can limit people from entering those very precarious situations, in particular for human trafficking, in particular for women and for children, is a good thing for us. Because we as the United States should be a defender of civil rights, of human rights. We should understand and know that every life is valuable. And unless we reform our immigration system, we're not going to get to the place that we need in this country to meet our workforce needs and at the same time treat people with dignity.
And Congressman, the Trump administration has been signing a slew of executive orders and taking executive action, consolidating power for the president. My question to you is, should the Supreme Court, go against one of these Trump rulings and the executive branch ends up going against that ruling or putting us into a constitutional crisis, ignoring a Supreme Court rule, what is the legislative branch prepared to do, specifically the Democratic Party? What is the plan if we do find ourselves in that spot and we find ourselves with a president that's not willing to listen to the courts like he and his vice president have indicated?
Well, look, it's not Democrats' fault that this is happening. It's Republicans' fault. So I would actually implore Republicans in the House and in the Senate to take a stand for their country. Because when you swear an oath for your position as a member of Congress, you're swearing an oath to the Constitution. You're not swearing an oath to the president. You're not swearing an oath to a king or a dictator. And they have to abide and follow the rules dictated by the U.S. Constitution. And so it's going to take some spine and some backbone from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to say that this is wrong. Because right now we're in the minority, both in the House and in the Senate, and we don't have the administration. And so in the event that that would happen, it's going to have to take some courageous voices on the other side of the aisle to stop it from happening. Certainly we can do what we can, but look, our partners are the states, the tribes, the nonprofits, the folks who have the opportunity to litigate against the president and actually take these cases to the Supreme Court. But any violation of a federal court order or the Supreme Court decision is going to signal a new era for this country. And certainly Democrats are going to try to do everything we can to stop it. But for the Republicans that are on that side of the aisle that may be supporting this, it's going to be up to them to have the courage and the backbone to be able to stop it.
Well, Congressman, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming into the studio today. It's always good to have you sit down and talk with us.
Thank you so much.
And that's all for today's episode. We will be back next week for regular coverage of the New Mexico legislative session. If you have questions you'd like me to ask our local lawmakers, you can submit those questions to feedback@nmsu.edu. In the meantime, you can stay up to date on the latest local news at krwg.org. For all of us here at KRWG Public Media, I'm Jonny Coker, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Your Legislators.